We have just done a series on medieval Arab cities, which you can see. I've included the playlist below the video. And I thought today's discussion will be a nice continuation. How did people travel in the medieval Arab world between the cities? This may be obvious, but let's look into it into more detail. When looking at transport in the medieval world, things like horses, carriages, mules come to mind. It's a massive difference to how we travel today with extreme luxury and speed. Transport and travel has always been a vital component of daily life, whether it's for leisure or more importantly for trade, which was extremely significant in the medieval Arab world. It was very important goods reached their destination and the merchants also had a safe journey. So when discussing this topic, what comes to mind straight away is Ibn Battuta. He was a famous scholar who travelled the medieval Arab world. He was a Moroccan scholar. And we have documents of his travel diaries. And the other names like Ibn Jubair were also prominent in that area. And what this means is that travel in the medieval Arab world was mostly linked to travelling for scholarly or educational reasons, or it could be for trade, leisure, and also religious pilgrimage. From Bilad al-Sham to Iraq to Egypt and Arabia, it was all one connected large piece of land. So what were the most common types of transportation? Now when we think of the Arab world, even nowadays, what instantly comes to mind is camels. Yes, they were used extensively for travel and for transportation in the medieval Mediterranean. The camel has many benefits. As you know, it was made for extreme heat and dry climates, which is a typical description of the deserts of Arabia. It can travel miles and survive long durations without water. They are very strong and can carry many things on their backs. The camel was the prime animal for transport. If you want to do a comparison to nowadays, having a camel was like having a massive truck or van. It can carry so much and was very efficient because of its high endurance. Also, you had to be relatively wealthy to own your own camel. The more camels you owned, the wealthier you were. But not everyone had the luxury of owning a camel. So there were other alternatives like traveling on a donkey or a mule. A mule was actually very common, and it was a very useful animal for transport, specifically even tracing back to the ancient times. It was easier to keep calm and was more obedient to your orders than, for example, a horse which you had to train and tame quite extensively. It would be able to carry a heavy load and also didn't need much maintenance. It had a lot of value. However, not everyone could afford an animal. A lot of medieval Arabs would have to travel by foot. This wasn't easy given the fact that the medieval Islamic empires didn't really invest in roads or clear paths for transport. Unlike the Romans, who invested heavily in their roads that connected different cities, which we can see the remains of even up until today, the Arabs never saw a need to invest heavily in construction of paved roads. Because frankly, camels, donkeys and mules didn't need roads to be able to travel. They were completely fine traveling through the trade routes in the medieval Arab world, which were deserts and mountains. Sometimes you had flat ground, obviously. But on the other hand, they did put a lot of attention into building bridges. They did this to ensure camels, mules and people were able to cross rivers that were too deep. In fact, Baghdad was known for pontoon bridges which were over the Tigris River. And to give a quick summary of a pontoon bridge, it's literally a floating bridge. They would use shallow boats as the main support to carry the loads, and it was mainly used as kind of a temporary solution to allow traffic to pass over the rivers. And they were actually utilised significantly all over the medieval world, not just in the Mediterranean. For example, if you look at the Crusaders, when they were going on their crusade, the armies also made use of the pontoon bridges to be able to go on their holy wars. But you couldn't build bridges everywhere over the waters, which brings us onto the discussion of ships. This was a preferable option as port cities were used extensively in the medieval Arab world. Those who came from Spain or Andalusia, and port cities, which were located on the coasts of the Mediterranean, preferred to travel by ship. Pilgrims and merchants and traders would travel by ships, and this was because the waters of the Mediterranean were very calm and relatively safe to travel on. In fact, maritime travel became so important it allowed Arab traders to take control of the routes. Surprisingly, this undermined the well-known Silk Road. Now, as you know, the Silk Road route was very important, not just in the medieval era, even before that, but the Arab merchants who used to travel by sea managed to undermine this trade route. And this was because ships were able to carry a lot more goods, and therefore it made more sense to use maritime transport in the calm waters of the Arab world. For the Silk Road to be undermined in that specific period must have meant that traders and those who travelled by sea found it more efficient and more profitable. Now onto the travelling culture in the medieval Arab world. If we look at travel nowadays, you can see a lot of people travel alone, going to and from work. Nowadays our companion is the phone, whether you're on the train or getting an Uber. However, it was very different for the medieval Arab world. Bandits would often raid travellers and their goods. So what people needed to do, or what they always would do, is travel with a rafiq, which is Arabic for friend or companion. In fact, it was considered bad practice and even disgraceful if you let someone travel alone, even if it was a short distance. Having a travelling companion was essential in the medieval Arab world. And there was an Arabic proverb which was that the companion is more important than the route taken. So in that case, you'd hope to have a decent mate who can hold a good conversation when travelling. And what you also found on trade routes was funduks, also known as inns or hotels, and they were very popular on the travelling routes. The empires who ruled in the medieval Arab world placed a huge importance on the inns to ensure that firstly traders and merchants had a pleasant journey and also a safe one. Many medieval geographers reported thousands of inns from Spain all the way to Syria and Egypt. However, the taxes were heavy on the innkeepers. They used to make significant revenue from travellers and merchants who used to stop and stay, and therefore the rulers saw this as an important source of income for the state. Because trade was so important, the inns would most of the time be full, and this made rulers invest heavily in them. A famous vizier for the Seljuk Empire, Nizam al-Mulk, emphasized on the importance of having inns. He says, and I quote, "Constructing underground channels, digging main canals, building bridges across the great waters, rehabilitating villages and farms, raining fortifications and building new towns and erecting lofty buildings and magnificent dwellings. He will have inns to own the highways and schools for those who seek knowledge, for which things he will be renowned forever. He will gather the fruit of his good works in the next world, and blessings will be showered upon him." This was a short description by Nizam al-Mulk saying what makes a civilization advanced. You can notice he mentions the inns as one of the fundamental components of an advanced society. And as you all know, medieval inns were rectangular and had a courtyard with stables for the horses and other animals to rest. Some inns had mosques built into the structure to allow merchants to pray. Some also had churches and synagogues next to them for those who followed other religions. But on the contrary, there were some inns which actually served as taverns and brothels, so you had a lot of options and a lot of kind of things going on there. So it's good to know, or at least for the people who lived back then, that there was variety. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, do make sure you give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You can also leave a comment if you want. And if you want to follow us on our social media pages, I've included the links in the description below.